In 2005, the Phoenix police, in the capital of Arizona, USA, faced one of the most stressful situations in their history. Several serial killers were simultaneously operating in the county, robbing, raping, and killing women, men, and even pets. Mark Goudeau, a native of Phoenix, was born on September 6, 1964, into a lower-class family. He had 14 siblings, and Mark was the youngest among them. Some sources report that the Goudeau family had issues with illegal substances. However, not all of them went down a bad path. Many became good and hard-working people. Mark's mother died when he was 12, and he moved in with his older sister. In middle school, he played American football, although not as successfully as his older brother Michael. In high school, due to financial difficulties, Mark had to start working. Eventually, he lost interest in his studies due to poor performance and dropped out of school in 1982, shortly before completing the 12th grade. That same year, a girl contacted the police, claiming that throughout 1981, Mark and his brother Michael repeatedly raped her at home. However, during the investigation, the police found that the girl led an antisocial lifestyle and voluntarily engaged in intimate relations with the brothers, casting doubt on her testimony. No charges were filed against Mark Goudeau, and the girl soon left Phoenix. This was just the beginning. At the age of 23, Mark Goudeau was arrested for burglary, a year later for drunk driving, and at 25, he was charged with sexual assault and second-degree attempted murder. The victim's identity was not disclosed, but the press referred to her as Darling. Early in the morning of August 6, 1989, the police responded to a call reporting that a man was beating a woman with a rifle but in a semi-conscious state in a parking lot. Officers arriving at the scene found Darling naked from the waist up with a bleeding head. Witnesses reported seeing a man leaving with an additional revolver. The woman was hospitalized with a fractured skull, deep lacerations, and bruises all over her body. When she was able to testify 3 days later, she stated that the attacker was Mark Goudeau and provided her address. Darling said they were acquainted and that while at her apartment, Mark repeatedly beat her, threw her into the bathtub, and tried to drown her, but she managed to escape, and the attacker pursued her to the parking lot. The police arrested Goudeau, who claimed he had consensual sex with Darling when two armed men, one with a machine gun, beat her and left. He stated he was helping the woman get to her grandmother's house when the men returned and beat her again before fleeing. Of course, no one believed him. Mark faced decades of imprisonment, but a series of errors and judicial leniencies allowed him to secure a plea deal, admitting guilt to several counts of aggravated assault, which granted him eligibility for parole in a year. When he was due for sentencing, Goudeau, who was inexplicably free, robbed a supermarket and, using a silver gun that would be described in several other cases, forced employees to accompany him to his car. However, many people witnessed this scene and alerted authorities, providing the car model and license plate number, and soon officers apprehended Mark at his shooting range with the stolen money. One might think that charges of armed robbery and kidnapping would add to the existing charges of assaulting Darling, resulting in a more substantial sentence. But in reality, in the case of the woman's rape, the judge sentenced Mark to 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10 years, and in the second case, also thanks to a plea deal, he was sentenced to only 4 years. After 13 years of imprisonment, on March 8, 2004, Mark Goudeau appeared before the State Parole Board. It was established that he behaved well in prison and completed several self-help programs. Additionally, the inmate married a woman named Wendy Carr, with whom he lived before his incarceration. At the hearings, Wendy and a prison activist testified in favor of Goudeau, claiming that alcohol and illegal substances were the reasons for his bad behavior. Ultimately, the board, which held the decision, voted 4-1 in favor of Mark Goudeau's early release. Mark and Wendy resumed living together to start a new life away from crime. According to available information, the man found work as a laborer in a large construction company, where he was considered a diligent worker and was well liked by his colleagues. The couple's life and the community in the area were developing normally, but a series of crimes began to threaten the peace of Phoenix residents. On August 6, 2005, 3 teenage girls were attacked by an armed man who forced them to go behind a church on a road called Baseline Road, where he assaulted 2 of them. This marked the beginning of a long list of crimes that would keep the city's public on high alert and the special services' intense pursuit in the following months. A week later, on August 14, another sexual assault was reported, during which the victim's belongings were stolen. 3 weeks later, in early September, the murder of a young woman named Georgia Thompson, who was only 19 years old, was reported. Her body was found with an unbuttoned shirt, unbuttoned pants, and a gunshot wound to the head. Her wallet was never found. Another sexual assault occurred on September 15, and just 5 days later, 2 young sisters walking home from the park became new victims. One of the girls was pregnant, but that didn't stop the man from attacking them, and at gunpoint, forcing them to move to a secluded spot where he raped the younger girl while pointing the gun at her pregnant sister's belly. On September 28, 2005, 2 separate crimes were reported, a robbery and a sexual assault with robbery. In the following days, weeks, and months, the crimes continued to merge into a mix of sexual assaults with robberies. The cases were recorded within a radius close to Baseline Road, leading to the unknown criminal being called the Baseline Rapist. On November 3 and 7, numerous crimes were committed. On November 3, at 8:00 p.m., a robbery was reported, and 9 minutes later, a sexual assault occurred nearby. On the same day, a man described as dark-skinned, with dreadlocks and a fisherman's hat, entered a store and, threatening with a gun, stole $720 and. Less than 10 minutes later, a report came in that a man in a Halloween costume and mask sexually assaulted a girl who was donating items to a charity bin. After the assault, the criminal demanded that the victim drive him around the corner as he had just committed a robbery. 4 days later, the mysterious man robbed 11 people between restaurants on the same street. After the last robbery, the criminal fired into the air. A bullet casing was retrieved. But on December 12, the already dire situation only worsened. That night, Phoenix homicide detectives were called to the scene of a woman's body found behind a warehouse. Investigators arriving at the scene found the woman's body lying face up in a pool of blood. The woman had been shot twice in the head at close range, and she had no wallet or identification, only a shopping bag with a Christmas design. A man contacted the police, claiming he might have seen the killer. His name was Peter Acho, and he worked at the same warehouse where, he said, there was a fast food outlet behind which the body was found. According to Peter, he heard a knock on the back door and thought kids were playing soccer in the area. Acho went outside to chase them away and saw a man in a hoodie leaning over the motionless body. The man in the hoodie also saw Acho, stood up, and pointed his silver-colored gun at the worker, fired, but the gun misfired. Peter immediately ran back inside and locked himself in the warehouse. At the scene, investigators found 2 spent .38 caliber bullet casings and an intact bullet that missed Peter Acho. The next day, authorities identified the victim as 39-year-old Tina Washington, who worked at a daycare center she was leaving when attacked. Authorities notified Tina's family and asked one of her adult sons if his mother wore jewelry. The grieving young man replied that she wore a very unusual ring with the names of her 3 children engraved next to each stone. One of the investigators recalled that a memo had been circulated in the police department about a man committing sexual assaults and robberies of women in the Baseline Road area and wondered if there was a connection between this and other cases. In early 2006, Phoenix police formed a special task force of experienced detectives to investigate these cases and assigned about 100 street officers to support the investigations on a permanent basis. Police released a composite sketch of a man with dreadlocks and a fisherman's hat, compiled from victim statements. The sketch was distributed to all media outlets. Police held meetings with the public to distribute the image, which was later even placed on billboards offering a $100,000 and reward for information leading to the arrest of this person. But the number of crimes continued to rise. On February 20, 2006, shortly after 7:30 a.m., the lifeless bodies of 38-year-old Romeo Vargas and 30-year-old Minapama Roman were found in a food truck where they worked. Both had been shot. The following month, on March 15, 2 restaurant employees were found dead. The body of 20-year-old Liliana Sanchez Cabrera was discovered in a fast food restaurant parking lot, and her colleague Chao Chu's body was found 2 kilometers away. Both were killed by gunshots to the head. 2 weeks later, on March 29, a local businessman called the police after discovering bloodstains in a parking lot. Authorities arrived at the scene, but found nothing after searching the area. A week later, the same caller contacted the police again, having discovered a woman's body in a state of advanced decomposition with a gunshot wound to the head. The victim was identified as Nicole Gibson. On April 10, an 8-year-old boy was returning home from school. When he entered the house, he heard water running in the bathroom and, upon entering, found the body of his mother, Sofia Nunes. The cause of death was a gunshot to the head. On May 1, in the parking lot of the same restaurants where 11 people were robbed in November, a man in a latex Halloween mask abducted a woman from a car and sexually assaulted her. The investigators' task was not easy. There were no witnesses to the incidents. And worse, another series of random victims emerged, including men, women, and even pets, who were shot from a moving vehicle. Other serial killers were also operating in parallel. In late June, 37-year-old Carmen Miranda was abducted from a car wash while talking on the phone with her boyfriend, who heard her screams as she was attacked. The attacker overpowered her, took the wheel of the car, and drove about 100 meters, parking behind a hair salon where the woman was later found with a gunshot wound to the forehead. This attack was captured on surveillance camera, but the image was too grainy to identify the attacker. At this time, the criminal was renamed the Baseline Killer. At this point, you, like me, are probably wondering how, with so many sexual assaults, there was no mention of DNA samples for identifying the perpetrator. Since a subsequent court case in a higher instance claimed that the police department did not conduct timely checks of available DNA samples, this may have been partly true. As summer approached, detectives handling the case began to insist on more urgent processing of DNA evidence. It became known that investigators found DNA on the breast of a girl attacked in the presence of her pregnant sister. Phoenix lab specialists immediately collected a sample from the left breast, which was contaminated but still preserved. However, after analyzing it, they concluded that it was insufficient for identifying a suspect. This and other samples were sent to the Arizona State Forensic Laboratory, which had more resources than the Phoenix City Lab, and a list of 75 potential suspects was also sent there. Meanwhile, a state prison investigator contacted the task force on the case and reported that a woman claimed to have seen the Baseline Killer's composite sketch and knew who he was. She identified him as Mark Goudeau. The caller turned out to be Darling, whose rape initially landed him in prison. Orders were given to locate the man and place him under surveillance. On July 21, 2006, a detective and a probation officer visited Mark, and he agreed to provide the requested fingerprint and DNA samples. Ballistics experts were able to analyze the bullets and casings found at the crime scenes and victims and determined that they were all fired from the same weapon, a .38 caliber gun. Thus, it was confirmed that all these cases were connected and that the same person was responsible for them. Finally, experts from the Arizona State Forensic Laboratory analyzed the sample taken from the left breast and, using a new procedure, were able to isolate and identify male DNA. On September 2, 2006, they informed Phoenix police that the genetic sample belonged to Mark Goudeau. Subsequently, this same profile would be matched to other rape victims. On September 6, on his 40th birthday, Goudeau was arrested without resistance in front of his home. Initially, he was arrested for the rape of one of the sisters, and over time, the charges expanded to include several other cases of sexual assault. Most of the attacks were committed within a 4-kilometer perimeter around Mark's home. Investigators conducted several searches and seizures at Goudeau's house. Among the first items seized was a pair of white sneakers that caught the police's attention, as many victims referred to the attacker wearing white or black shoes. Despite the shoes being washed, forensic analysis found DNA from 2 murdered victims, one belonging to the only male killed by Mark, Chow Chu, and the other to Nicole Gibson, killed in late March 2005. The lead detective on the case was dissatisfied that only the white sneakers were seized, suspecting that more evidence might be on other shoes. Since almost all of Goudeau's victims were shot at close range, based on the evidence obtained from the first pair of shoes, a warrant was issued for a second search of Mark's house, and the task of collecting and analyzing the rest of the shoes became monumental, as Goudeau had dozens of pairs. But the effort was worth it. Inside a brown leather boot and a sealed plastic sandwich bag, some clothing items were found, including Tina Washington's ring and bracelet. After Mark Goudeau's arrest, his wife Wendy Carr became his main defender, claiming that the Phoenix police's findings were lies and that officials planted the evidence found in their home to frame her husband and gain fame from solving one of Arizona's most shocking criminal cases. But Phoenix police released hundreds of pages detailing all the steps taken in the investigation of the baseline killer case. It became known that investigators had at least 10 suspects, but further investigation had already ruled out several individuals. Mark Goudeau's name appears in these documents, albeit in rare mentions. Phoenix police charged Mark Goudeau with 74 counts, including 9 first-degree murders, including the murder of Sophia Nunes on April 10, 2006, who was known to have known her attacker as he installed a surveillance system in her home. In addition to this, 5 sexual assaults and 3 attempted sexual assaults, 10 counts of kidnapping, 12 cases of armed robbery, 4 attempted armed robberies, 3 counts of sexual abuse, 9 crimes against minors, 13 aggravated assaults, and 3 cases of indecent exposure. In March 2017, the prosecution announced it would seek the death penalty for Goudeau and claimed that the deceased women did not allow themselves to be raped. The trial against Mark took place in 2 separate court sessions, one in 2007 and another in 2011. The defense's main challenge was the legality of the search of the defendant's home, implying that the evidence found there was planted by the police. By the end of the 2 trials, Mark Goudeau was found guilty of committing 76 crimes against 13 victims. For this, he received 34 years of imprisonment, as well as a death sentence for each of the 9 murders. Mark Goudeau is currently on death row in Arizona. Other serial killers operating in parallel with Mark Goudeau were Dale Hossder and Samuel Dietemann. They committed the majority of their crimes by shooting from a moving vehicle, apparently driven by a sporting interest. But they were also arsonists and hitmen. From May 2005 to August 2006, they killed 8 people in at least 9 shootings, allegedly under the influence of illegal substances. Many people and pets were injured, and several fires were set. This duo was also eventually apprehended by authorities and brought to trial, resulting in Dale Hostner being sentenced to death without the possibility of parole, while Samuel was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Friends, what do you think about this story? Write your opinion in the comments, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel and other social networks. You can find links to them in the description below this video. Goodbye for now.